Aloha and welcome to week 8 of CM400C. I hope you're finding this semester going really smoothly. I'm really enjoying grading everyone's work. I think you guys are doing a really fabulous job, so I just wanted to start off with that. In today's lecture, I'm going to discuss the topic of working with programmers. The reason I'm covering this topic is as a designer, it will only benefit you to be able to communicate with programmers on your team. Let's first start off with a quick review of what we learned from week 7's lecture, Designing for Clients. When you are designing for clients, you want to have a clear set of goals in mind, and McKay presents some goals that you as a designer should strive to achieve. You can read more about this on page 321 of the McKay text. So ultimately, the focus of your design should achieve one thing quickly and efficiently within the mobile application, optimize for small screens and touch-based interactions, and take full advantage of the device capabilities. So here's a full checklist of the items that you should expect to receive from your client. Keep in mind that it may benefit you to work with your client to come up with the user personas, design timeline, and list of deliverables. The more familiar you are with your client's app needs, purpose, and goals enables you as a designer to create a great UI and UX for your client as well as their target audience. Remember that this is a checklist of deliverables that you can offer to your client. Help them to understand what each deliverable is, so you might want to provide an example, and why it's important. Remember that you want to agree on design deliverables and timeline before you start the project. This is really critical because you want to make sure that you're able to complete the work within a given timeline. Keep in mind that you and your client will want to discuss and review designs as you complete them. Remember to set aside that time either weekly or bi-monthly from the beginning of the project period. So you want to maintain constant contact with your client. As I mentioned in my first lecture of this course, designing mobile apps in most cases will require you to work closely with mobile app developers or programmers. By merging your design expertise with some developer expertise, you and your developers will be able to create a mobile app experience that meets the needs of your clients. Also, the experience of working with each other will be much more friendly, and it will feel more like a team if you guys kind of understand concepts of design and development. Because mobile app development is a very fast-paced and arduous process, so it's really hard and takes a lot of time to create a mobile app. Working with programmers early on in the design process will save you from unnecessary work in the app build-out phase. So I've come up with 4 best practices for designers to know when working with programmers. So you want to know basic development terminology. I've also added something that I call coding recipes. So you want to know how to identify some coding recipes, come up with some coding recipes. Documentation, you want to know how to read Apple's documentation or other documentation for that matter. And you need to be able to make decisions. So here's a list of basic development terminology that you may hear developers refer to when you're working with them. In the next series of slides, I'll briefly go over and provide a quick definition of each term. In week 10, I will provide a much more detailed lecture on many of these terms, so I'm not going to go into great detail today. What is a program? So a program is an organized list of instructions that when executed causes the computer to behave in a predetermined manner. Without programs, computers are pretty much useless. So this tells you how valuable programmers are. They actually write the program and therefore instruct the computer what to do. So what is an algorithm? So you may be asking yourself, what's the difference between a program and an algorithm? Because it kind of sounds similar, right? An algorithm is a self-contained, step-by-step set of operations to be performed. In other words, a computer program is a specific implementation of an algorithm or a set of algorithms designed to be used in conjunction with computer hardware. Right? So the program actually interacts with the actual hardware. The algorithm doesn't necessarily, it's part of the program, but it's not the whole thing. So program is really the whole big picture. An algorithm is just part of a program. What is a method? In object-oriented programming, so object-oriented programming in iOS development, we used Objective-C and Swift, which are object-oriented programming languages. And in that case, a method is a subroutine, procedure, or function associated with a class. And this doesn't have to make complete sense to you right now, but if you have any questions, you can refer to the internet, you can refer to Apple's documentation in terms of defining what a class is, what a method is, and what object-oriented programming is. But this is just some vocabulary that you'll hear programmers talk about. What are variables? A variable is nothing but a name given to a storage area that our programs can manipulate. Each variable has a specific data type. And as I mentioned, I'll be going into some detail about what variables are in a future lecture. So what are arrays? It represents an ordered collection of objects. So arrays can hold a collection of objects. If your app requires holding a list of information or images, for example, you would explain to the developer that these images would be contained within an array and displayed on a specific wireframe screen that you created. So what is an implementation file? Programmers may throw this term around. So an implementation file is where the programmer has written all the source code for the project. This is where the programmer writes all the code for all the methods in his or her program. So source code is basically everything that makes the app work. So the implementation file is very, very important. And be sure that you're familiar, or that you become very, very familiar with the HIG UI elements that I discussed during weeks 3 and 4 lectures. As I mentioned, there's tons of controls. I think there's about 12 or 14 controls. Several content views I discussed, temporary views that I discussed, of course the app icon, and launch images. So minimum viable product is a version of the app that allows your client to provide feedback on the future direction of the application. As a designer, you want to set weekly MVP goals to meet your design timeline. So you want to set, okay, I'm going to mock up screens 1 through 3 by this date, and then I'm going to set up a meeting with the client. So you always want to think MVP. You always want to have something to show your client, some goal to work towards as a designer. And what is agile development? So this is from the Agile Manifesto. Individuals and interactions in agile development, self-organized, and motivation is very important, as are interactions like paired programming. This type of development really values working with others, so in a team environment. And as I mentioned, oftentimes you'll have more than one developer on a team. Therefore, a lot of times they'll be working together to solve a problem. Agile development values working towards a product rather than just presenting documents to clients in meetings. So what you want to stay away from is just giving them pieces of paper. You actually want to have prototypes ready for your clients when you meet with them. Especially in the development phase. In the design phase, it may not be as critical. Agile development values customer collaboration. So designers and developers value continuous and open communication with their clients at every stage of the product development and design. And lastly, agile development values responding to change quickly rather than waiting for permission to work on the next version or iteration of an app. So once you get feedback from your client, you're basically given the permission to change rather than follow like an original plan. And then here we move to coding recipes. This is taking wireframes to the next level, and it can really help a designer realize and understand the development process. This is where it will be helpful for you as a designer to know your HIG vocabulary. So as you can see here, this is where your HIG vocabulary becomes really important. and then the coding recipe starts to get into some coding. So coding recipes include the following: ingredients and coding procedures. So if we look back here, we have ingredients, and then here's the coding recipe or the coding procedures. I don't go into detail about coding, so you may not be able to suggest methods or properties for developers to use. However, you can provide sentences describing how the user will interact with each UI element on each of your wireframe screens. This is probably one of the most helpful things that you can provide to your developer. All right, so let's look at an example. So what are the ingredients in screen 1? So we have a UI tab bar controller, and then this here and this here, that is part of a UI collection view. And then, so this is the entire view, and then this here is the cell, the UI collection view cell. And then whenever you have an image, you always have to have a UI image in there. So you might be a little bit confused between user story versus coding procedure. So what I wanted to do here is present for screen 1 what is the user story. So as a user, right, I would like to view a list of places to visit based on which category I select. So if we go back a slide, these are the categories, right? Morning grub and coffee, and it goes on and on and on. So as the user scrolls up, right, and they select something, so say we select morning grub and coffee, gain access to a list of places to visit. So this here is the list of places to visit when they tap on here. But coding procedures, as you can see, here's some of my examples. So you embed view controllers within the UI tab bar view. So this really gets into the programming side. You rename the tab bar items. You set up the collection view cell and layout. And you set up the table view. So that's really getting into the coding procedure side. And you know, you guys are welcome to ask me questions. If you're really curious about the programming side of things, feel free to email me, or you know, I'm more than happy to meet with you on campus to teach you a little bit of coding as well. Right, so here's an example of some of the coding procedures for screen 1, the screen that we were just looking at. Okay, so this kind of page just sums up the coding recipe breakdown. Ingredients, of course, are the UI elements that make up each screen. Coding procedures have to do with instructions to set up your implementation, right? So your source code or coding process. And then, of course, the previous slide, I wanted you to understand that user stories are different from coding procedures. And lastly, documentation is really a great place to start to learn more about programming. Like I said, it's just going to benefit you as a designer. Where can you access it? You can just do an online search because it's faster, and you may find more helpful online resources too. So you don't have to necessarily look at the Apple Developer Library. You can just Google any question you have, and there will definitely be information. Let's look at Apple's documentation on arrays. So usually it'll pop up at the very top here. So NSArray, class reference, Apple Developer. So if you see developer.apple.com, you already know that you're looking at anything iOS or OS for that matter. So remember that array represents a collection of items, right? In Objective-C, an array is called an NSArray, and it manages ordered collections of objects called arrays, right? So you can find out the definition of what it is. These are methods here, and if you click on a method, it gives you some information about what the method does. I think basically those are kind of the things that you want to know. So initializing an array, you can go into learning about what it returns, and then things start to get really complicated. So knowing how to access methods is, or how to learn more about anything in development, yeah, just basically Google it and you'll get the information that you're looking for. If you're interested in diving into the documentation, here are some readings that I would suggest. You can simply Google them: Foundation Framework, Start Developing iOS Apps Today, User Experience Starting Point, iOS Human Interface Guidelines. So definitely start here if you're really interested in learning more and becoming a better designer. You guys should definitely be up to par with the Human Interface Guidelines. Lastly, becoming a successful designer that can contribute to the overall architecture of an app relies on your willingness to learn some programming basics. The ability to communicate with your entire dev team would undoubtedly support the creation of an app that exceeds the expectations of your client. In addition to learning how to communicate with programmers, you will also need to become comfortable with making decisions on your own sometimes. As a designer, your developers will rely on you to make decisions regarding important UI features and elements. So font and tint color. So this is kind of fun. You guys get to play around with that. UI elements for each screen, and the design of graphics and the color palette choices that will set the stage for app branding. So really, developers won't deal so much with the app branding, the color palette side of things. They may have opinions about graphics and things like that, but overall they are going to rely on you for design because they're going to be really busy developing the application. So that's the end of this week's lecture. What's coming up though is I want to make sure that you guys continue working on your project number 2. If you'd like to set up a meeting online or in person, please let me know. I would be more than happy to meet with you. Your assignment number 6 or blog post number 4 is due next week. And then next week, week 9, the theme of that week is wireframing to prototyping, and I'm going to be talking about resources for designers. All right, well, thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. And of course, always email me if you have any questions or concerns.